answers to the speakers up front. That's where you can take some over there. Ellen, you can wait outside and walk on stage when we're ready to start.
Two.
Hello and good morning. Thanks so very much for being here. And hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to many people joining us online, depend on what time zone you are. So we are very grateful to have all of you here. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to our today's event marking the launch of our report on Hiroshima AI Process Reporting Framework, developed in collaboration and partnership with Center for Democracy and Technology. Transparency and impact reporting frameworks such as HAIPs provide a credible mechanism for demonstrating responsible AI in practice. The India AI Impact Summit shows how this accountability can be applied at national scale. Together with the HAIP reporting and other transparency mechanisms, they connect global transparency standards with real-world AI deployment and measurable public impact. The discussions that we're having today cannot be more timely as the momentum builds towards one of the most consequential moments in the AI policy this year, the India AI Impact Summit. As the fourth in a series of international summits that started in UK in 2023 and the first to be held at the Global South, the summit will help shape global conversations on AI governance, adoption, and impact at a critical juncture for both geopolitics and technological development. To discuss India's priorities and vision for the summit, we are most honored to be joined today by His Excellency Ambassador Vinay Kwatra. Ambassador Kwatra is a career diplomat and a senior leader of India's Foreign Service. His distinguished career has included posts as India's ambassador to Nepal, as well as its ambassador to France and permanent representative to UNESCO. Earlier in his career, he served as Director and Joint Secretary of the South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation in Kathmandu, the Deputy Chief of Mission in Beijing, and a variety of other postings around the world, including Tashkent, Durban, Karachi, and Geneva. Most recently, prior to being named India's ambassador to the United States, he served as India's Foreign Secretary, leading the nation's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. In his current role, he has made AI a high priority for the mission and has been deeply involved in discussions on AI policy in the US and abroad. We are very grateful that he could join us today for today's conversation, and without any further ado, I give the floor to the Master.
Thank you very much, distinguished participants, colleagues, and all of us who are joining us today. Very, very good morning, and thank you very much, Brookings, for convening today's discussion on global AI governance, especially in the context of the upcoming India AI Impact Summit, which is to be held in Delhi on February 19, 20th. If you look at the history of human civilization, it has always had a very fascinating relationship with the tools that shape it throughout. And I think we are presently witnessing a time frame in our advancement where the tool of technology manifested through artificial intelligence, what we call artificial intelligence, which are basically mathematical models to process the data sets in a manner that gives you something which is very productivity enhancing, changing the manner in which you engage with your ecosystem and surroundings around you in fundamental way. India AI Impact Summit is being held in this fast emerging backdrop, I should say. Naturally, the technology per se looks at how we undertake many of the tasks differently, how we learn, how we work. I would say even how we innovate, govern, create, and ultimately, naturally, how we carry on with our daily lives. I don't think it's any longer a question of the impact of AI. I think that is very clear. Some say it's going to be transformative. Some have different points of view. But I think it's a question of how exactly it will do it. What would that impact be? And what sections of the human society would actually end up benefiting from it more, some less. Those are all the points which would very much be part of the AI summit. There is naturally, as we see, particularly in the US, a strong impetus on very, very large, huge, substantial investments leading to the development of new frontier models pretty much every 6 months. There are big ticket announcements, large action plans. There are multiple ideas and proposals for artificial intelligence, both in the space of development, but also in the space of deployment of those developments. We in India approach the artificial intelligence like any other piece of technology from a purpose and intentionality, and from a template that focuses on its value creation for the society, not necessarily just wealth creation, but also looking at it from the value template. We are a developing economy, a fast-growing developing economy, in fact, the fastest-growing large economy in the world. The government of India, to position this in our own developmental context and the context of our economic growth, launched what we call the India AI mission. Prime Minister Modi launched that. And the guiding vision of that is making AI in India, making AI work for India, but also building its cooperation possibilities for the societies outside India, for the countries outside India. You touched upon it, that the discussions covered under the past AI summits, such as those in the UK, Seoul, Paris, they laid a very important groundwork for focusing on multiple aspects of AI: safety, ethics, how we can work together in the space of AI. The aim of the AI summit in Delhi would be to shift these conversations more from, I would say, commitments, more towards outcomes, specifically from principles to practice, and from national strategies. Each country has national AI strategy, to what could be benchmarked and measurable global progress in the field of AI. And from our perspective, under the leadership of Prime Minister Modi, this would be anchored essentially in 3 themes. The summit would be anchored in 3 themes. The first theme deals with the people itself. I don't know if you can bring that up, or yeah. So the first theme is for the people. Now, what it essentially would mean in terms of specifics would be that when you train models on data sets, whether those data sets are mindful of cultural diversity of the society in which the model is being pre-trained, for example, whether it doesn't have any inherent bias in that. So to remove inherent bias in the training of the models before you deploy them. So that's the people aspect of it, and naturally that is built into the very design part of the models that you develop, but equally in its deployment, especially when you spread it across multiple user cases of different industry. The planet sutra of it is obviously focusing on innovation responsibility, responsible innovation, and naturally reducing the resource footprint which the AI consumes while producing its outcome. And the progress sutra, which is the which envisages AI as an engine for inclusive growth. That is very, very important, particularly for countries like India, which are developing economies, as I said, that it should be inclusive of everybody in the society. And naturally aligning itself with the global development priorities with equitable access to the opportunity. It emphasizes, I think my Prime Minister is particularly very, very focused on this. It emphasizes democratizing the key AI resources. It should not just be available, it should be available rather to each and every individual in the society, so that they can innovate on their own depending upon what they think is good for them. But the tool is available to all, really. And under this overarching frame, these three sutras of people, planet, and progress, we have then built in the second layer what we call as 7 interconnected chakras, which essentially would take these AI products that are being developed, not just in India, but all over the world. And then in terms of their deployment, adoption, diffusion, to scale, spread them across these 7 chakras of human capital, essentially building a talent pipeline, not just for development, but also in case of user industries, talent development, not just for India, but also to be able to respond to the global needs in this space. Inclusion for social empowerment, naturally safe and trusted AI, that's very, very important. Resilience, innovation, and efficiency, science, democratizing AI resources, as I mentioned, and AI for economic growth and social good. So the value creation part is very important and is embedded in the social good. Now, when next month government representatives, technology experts, industrialists, startup entrepreneurs, and a large number of them, we have really got an overwhelming response to the Impact AI Summit of next month from all over the world, including in particular from the US. When they meet next month to chart the course for defining this AI deployment for future, I thought in that context I'll just highlight some of the aspects of how India is looking at beyond just the AI summit, the larger permeation of artificial intelligence into our ecosystem. We think we bring with us, India brings with it, intrinsic strengths to the large-scale deployment and adoption of AI. I would even add adoption and deployment to scale, which is very, very important for any technology to eventually scale up at the level of society, and for the industry and enterprises to draw benefit from technology. It has to be diffused at the level of large society and large enterprises. We are also probably one of the most, if not the most, holder of most diverse data sets for the training of AI. and I would say both structured data sets and unstructured data sets, and across different industry domain and domains of governance. And our society has a characteristic which is it relates to technology very easily. So it's able to adopt and diffuse technology at scale relatively easily. We have classic examples of this in India. Our digital public infrastructure, which was built on the unique identification, unique payment interfaces, and other population scale platforms. And I say this with acute consciousness. They are population scale. So they are spread for the entire 1.4 billion people. Yet the cost per unit of the usage is probably the marginal cost is zero, if not even negative. And if you count the benefit that they bring to the society, perhaps the cost is even negative in a sense that they contribute more to the growth of the society rather than costing that much to the society. So we think that the way we adopt this, way we relate to technology, gives us a good blueprint for a frugal, inclusive, and a globally deployable innovative tool such as AI. As an economy, we are currently at about 4 trillion GDP. We expect it to touch 7 trillion by the end of this decade. And our goal is that by 2047, we are aiming of a GDP of approximately 30 trillion with a per capita income of $12,000. The idea is that this economic growth, the continuously rapidly trend of economic growth will transform not just India, our society, but will also lift every other country in our region and the region as such. And in this growth, we think technology in general and artificial intelligence in particular would have a huge role to play. Not just in bringing more productivity gains to the existing industry, of course, but perhaps even creating new areas of economy altogether. I can't even begin to visualize what those would be, because those would be function of how the society adopts AI and then innovates on it for them to create new business templates, new industrial templates, and new growth templates. But our strategy is focused on to harness the gains of AI. Is focused on one, building a robust compute infrastructure, which is very, very crucial for us to be able to build our own AI. And actually foster our own AI models, not necessarily a trillion parameter models like the US, but we have our unique needs and we can build models to respond to those unique needs. Creating a talent pipeline, as I mentioned earlier, not just for our needs, but also for the global needs. And do this through education and, of course, startup funding, which is very, very crucial because that's the nature of this industry. And in the end, but the goal is to make it open, affordable, and accessible to all, one and all, ensuring that innovation reaches to every person at the population scale, so that everybody is able to innovate. If I was to draw a derivative differentiation of this, this effort then spans into all the 5 layers of AI architecture. Application layer at the top, naturally the AI models layer, the one below it, the compute layer, which sits below the models to be able to build models on, and the data centers and the network infrastructure layer, which then powers the compute, and of course the energy layer, which starts at the very base of it. I will not even touch upon the research ecosystem of mathematicians, engineers, and the people who work in the labs to build these mathematical models, which then runs through these 5 application layers at one point or another. In our country, we are making progress in all the 5 layers simultaneously, and I would say in parallel. Building our own capabilities, we are trying to build. We believe firmly that we should build our own sovereign AI, sovereign LLMs, attracting investments in data centers, not just from within the public and the private sector capital in India, but also capital from abroad. We have recently had very impressive partnerships announced between India, Microsoft, India, Google, and a couple of other countries to build the compute infrastructure that will power some of these AI applications. At the application layer, as I alluded to earlier, we are focused on the kind of impact that the artificial intelligence and its algorithms will have on our society through impact on industry, governance, agriculture, delivery of healthcare, and the range of economic endeavor that the society engages in. There are already large number of successful user cases which are currently running in India of a kind. I mean, I can, if I start listing, I can take the whole session just listing them, but it gives you it's an indication of how comfortable we are in picking up a technology and purposing it to the societal needs of governance and bringing, as I said, gains to the economy. Um, uh, at the models layer, which is a very important layer for us to be able to build applications on, we know there are large number of models in the world. There are some proprietary models. There are some open source models, and they are being developed by many countries in the world. These models, in many ways, particularly the open source models, they lower the entry barriers in reducing the cost of the training and deployment, and it's very easy, at least on the open source model, to be able to distill them and then build either new models or new applications that run on those models. But in India, through these models, startups, researchers, developers are building on existing work, but also doing completely new work from the scratch. But we, as I said, firmly believe that every nation may have its own sovereign models to ensure, I think, the important aspects of one, data security, cultural relevance. As I said, the data sets parts in training the models. I think if you were to do an independent search on all the models in the world and say, I mean, if I was to ask myself, okay, these are 10 models in the world, what is the extent of Indian data sets on those, all the 10 models? And you will find the response is quite varied. It's not one figure in each of those cases. But if I look at the same Indian models, you'll find that percentage to be much higher. So there is a cultural relevance of the data sets, the way they are embedded in the models. And this is important because that then it takes you to the bias, which is a model. So a model is agnostic to, sentiments. It only recognizes the data. And our data in India, whether structured or unstructured, tends to be very context-heavy data. Context-heavy data is very, very important when you come to the question of benchmarking the artificial intelligence. So when you measure intelligence, you have to benchmark it on something. And that context-heavy data is very important when you start measuring the performance of AI against a certain benchmark of intelligence. So all these are very important aspects which we in our society and through the India Impact Summit will be addressing. We are currently, we already have and are building several AI models under the India AI mission. Some of them would be launched at the summit next month. I can just give one example, which is a well-known example, which is what is called Sarvam AI. The name of the model is Sarvam AI. It's a full-stack India AI model, which is trained from scratch. It's not a distilled model. It's a model trained from scratch on 22 Indian languages. So that's the context it has embedded in it. So when it produces the outcome token, what we call next predictable token, there are X 100,000 words in the English dictionary, but here you have the dictionary set of 22 Indian languages on which it can produce the next predictable token of the model. So that's the strength of the extent of heaviness of the context that has gone into the model. It also has recognition for 6 UN languages in it. There is another model being developed, which is a much smaller size. It's called Bharat Gen. That model is specific to industry cases. And we are hoping, we don't know, we are hoping that it will be a general purpose model so that it can get adopted across different industry sets. These models will have India-centric foundations, naturally, because data sets are Indian. It will support research, startups, public sector applications. Again, the aim remains affordable, inclusive, and population-scale solutions, in this case, AI solutions, in the Indian context, but of course, it will be available for others also. The third layer of the AI stack is the compute needed for training and inference. Naturally, we don't have 100,000 GPUs, data centers. I mean, that's not the kind of compute we have. But what government has done as an initiative is government has aggregated the compute available in the country and optimized the use of that aggregated compute at a cost which is 1/3 of the cost which is available globally. So you can take smaller compute, but optimize it, make it more efficient by aggregating it and giving it where it's needed most. And of course, as we grow, compute size would grow. I mentioned about 2-3 international cooperations. This would lead to larger compute presence in India. We are also at the same time building our own customized chips. They may be CPU chips, they may be GPU chips, but customized chips, which would meet the specific training and inference requirements of a given industry. Current models are not necessarily general purpose. What's applicable on auto may not be applicable on health. What's applicable on health may not be applicable on agriculture. So each industry still needs a unique model. So we are focusing on that very heavily. And this is backed up under it by our growing semiconductor ecosystem. So we have a large CPU-based semiconductor ecosystem on which this AI layer would ride very, very strongly. We currently, just for information, may not be AI related directly, but relevant to AI, we have 10 semiconductor projects which are currently running in India. And they look at basically legacy nodes, but legacy nodes are the ones which are used maximum in the industry. Including some of them are with collaboration with the US companies. And these projects, we aim will create chip development capabilities in India and eventually support the compute needs, which is what is required for the AI mission. Energy sector is the fifth layer, which has seen remarkable growth in India on year-to-year basis. We are successfully trying to balance the goals of meeting the rising electricity demand, but also promoting sustainability at the same time. Our current installed capacity is at about 475 gigawatts. We recently passed a Shanti bill, essentially, which supports nuclear energy innovations, including small modular reactors, small varies 50 to 250 megawatts. Capacity for on-site positioning of these power generation facilities to essentially bolster the sector because it is a very heavy energy-heavy industry. So across these all 5 layers, the domestic focus, the public and private, they've all kind of fed into this and given the impetus to building each of the layers of AI infrastructure. While it has strengthened how we are approaching this particular subject, it has also helped us build very strong international partnerships, particularly with the US, both with the government and also with the private sector. We think that our strengths are complementary. The US brings cutting edge AI research in terms of the new mathematical models, new technology streams within AI. So whether it's the existing LLMs or the new branches of it, advanced labs, you have metascale level cloud providers, which is very, very necessary in terms of access to the compute. Deep venture capital ecosystem. This marries very well with the kind of competencies that India brings to the table across the 5 layers that I mentioned. You can take each layer and draw up a combination chart, and you'll find there is a complementary matrix that is available there. There is already, as a result of this, a very promising momentum of specific cooperation-based projects on the ground. And US AI firms are already expanding their engineering and their research centers in India, which is what is the cutting edge of the development of AI. As we move towards the Delhi summit, India's message, my Prime Minister's message on the AI to the world is the future of AI must be inclusive, because it has to bring that value to the society, transparent, safe, and governed through through a model that is collective. We think that the benefits of AI cannot remain limited to a few nations and a small segment of society. It really, as I said, has to be population scale. And as my Prime Minister emphasizes, technology must be democratized in both its use and deployment. Our digital successes, which I alluded to earlier, I think will show us at least the way forward in the field of AI also. Through this comprehensive 5-layer architecture, widespread adoption and diffusion, and people-first, value-based impact, we in India are building an ecosystem that strengthens the nation, uplifts our entire society, and gives us template for building externalities of partnership of AI with other countries of the world. We think that the India Impact Summit 26 will be a pivotal platform to turn the vision into really a global collaborative action. That's what we are aiming for. I want to thank again Brookings and each one of you for sharing your time this morning, coming and listening to this. Thank you so much. Oops.
We're almost there.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador, for those really rich and illuminating remarks. And I think, as we can all tell, there's just an immense amount to follow in the world of AI. And that's only if we're talking about the AI layer, not least all of the other layers. But in order for the globe, really everyone to come together and make sense of the evolution of this technology, there's a need for some alignment of information about what is even being built, what are the values that are driving different developers of these tools, how are deployers incorporating these tools into real world contexts, automotive, medicine, et cetera, as we heard. And so in light of that need, the Hiroshima AI Process Reporting Framework has really been a leading effort to create a locus of that conversation, to say, what is it that we actually know about this field, what's developing, and how can we start to make sense of it and figure out what interventions are needed in a voluntary capacity, as a framework for other accountability initiatives, but as a start. So I'm Miranda Bogan. I'm the director of the AI Governance Lab at the Center for Democracy and Technology. We were excited to partner with Brookings to really dig into the HAIP Reporting Framework to understand what role has it played in actually helping to make sense of this space and where can it go from here. So just to ground the conversation, we'll get into a little bit of the research and have some great panel conversations as the event goes on. But what is the HAIP reporting framework? HAIP represents a multilateral effort to promote transparency and accountability in the development of advanced AI systems. It was launched in February 2025 as part of the G7 Hiroshima AI process and provides a mechanism for organizations who are developing AI systems to voluntarily report on risk mitigation practices and facilitate cross-organizational comparability and to identify and disseminate good practices. Obviously, to promote transparency and help address the many risks that I think all of us are aware are coming with this quite advanced technology. And finally, again, facilitating the comparability, I think, is a key piece here. You know, a lot of actors in this space are disclosing information about their progress, about their research, but it's quite disparate. It takes a lot of effort to pull together. And so some sort of structured framework where information can be at least organized in a similar manner to be able to look across the field can be helpful. And that was what motivated this effort. So what does the framework include? I'll just run through pretty quickly. Risk identification and evaluation. What are the practices companies are adopting? Risk management. What are the mitigations that they're taking on to kind of address those risks? What sort of reporting is included? Some of the reports that we'll talk about link out to other disclosures and transparency artifacts that companies and developers are already using, but simply kind of combining them, which can have its own use. What is the governance at an organizational level? What does incident management look like? How does that kind of ladder up to other organizational governance practices? Obviously, content authentication is a huge concern when it comes to generative AI and a big risk that folks are trying to manage, so included here. What does research look like? Where are we moving to? What's likely to come next? And finally, you know, how are we supporting this broader ecosystem, the human layer that the ambassador talked about? But one of the questions that comes up quite a bit is how does this approach fit into other transparency, documentation, disclosure artifacts? Are they duplicative? Are they harmonious? This is a visualization that helps me that there's there's really an ecosystem of disclosure and accountability frameworks here, starting at the very granular artifact level of documenting data sets to documenting characteristics of the models that are built on those data sets, so model cards, things like that. Increasingly, as we got more and more advanced AI, we're seeing system cards, which talk about a variety of components, not just a model, but other safeguards that are involved, other tools that might be connected to a model, really understanding the full picture of a given AI system. And then kind of bigger picture disclosures. And this is where we see the HAIP reporting framework coming in. What are the organizational priorities? What are the values that are driving an organization's approach to AI? How are they making sense of all of these things rather than just looking at individual technical artifacts, but pulling those together into a bigger picture. And of course, testing, evaluation, validation, verification play a role in all of these artifacts, both to really add more detail, but also to demonstrate what risk mitigation practices look like and where the progress is going. So, like we said, we think these are complementary efforts, but they are distinct activities. Organization level disclosure is a different activity than specific documentation about systems. They're for different audiences, they're for different purposes, but they do relate to one another. And we'll talk a little bit more about how stakeholders in the HAIP process understood all of these different activities. And so I'll turn it over to my colleague Valerie to talk about the research that we did and some of the findings.
Hi, I'm Valerie. I'm a fellow here at Brookings. Realizing in this slide deck we didn't provide a link or a QR code to the report, but you can find that on the Brookings website, and we can certainly promote that on this page as well for the event. So getting into our process for analyzing some of these reports. There are a couple of these. They're primarily focused on those who decided to submit, so the 24 organizations that chose to submit. We wanted to get a little bit broader, so we looked at the published submissions, of course, trying to compare across them to see how each organization approached the reporting framework. We conducted an open-ended survey of the AI community. This was really designed to look at people who could have submitted, to understand awareness about the framework, to see where the benefits and utilization lie in this process. And then where we found gaps still, we conducted some supplemental interviews with targeted stakeholders to just get a bit of a fuller picture of the entire ecosystem and where this really fits in. So for the reports, we found 24 submissions from 8 countries. Japan and the US were dominant, which makes some sense, of course. Report lengths varied from 9 to 60 pages, so there was quite a diversity in how people chose to fill these out. 1/3 looked kind of linked primarily out to external documentation. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges with that, but there was a lot of linking to external references, especially for frontier labs that may have a little bit more robust systems in place. For the survey, we received 110 responses. This was just a convenient sample, so nothing in here is representative, we'll say, but it does give us a sense of sort of what the broader community feels is important about the framework, where some of the challenges might be, where the benefits lie. The organizations that they represented, so it was primarily researchers and public interest actors, though we did have some representation from deployers, developers, and policymakers. Questions were focused on a variety of things related to familiarity with HAIP, some of the logistical aspects of submitting reports, incentives for completion, perceived impact, all different types of things to get a bit of a sense of what people saw the value in and where the benefits were and where some of the challenges arose in the process as well. So between 8 and 20 questions, open-ended, people responded to based on their familiarity and awareness of the HAIP process. We know, and this was something that came through in the actual HAIP reporting framework process, open-ended questions are hard, but we really didn't want to, because we weren't looking for a representative sample, we didn't want to lock people into some of our preconceived notions either. So what did we find? One of the main things about HAIP is that it's very flexible, right? And so it encourages participation from different types of organizations because of that built-in flexibility. That's an asset, but it's also an obstacle. The flexibility limits comparability, which was one of the main benefits that we heard from a lot of people about the impact of these the reporting framework. Because of that flexibility, there's an increased time commitment potentially. Some people will sort of give up in the process because they're unsure of how to respond to something, how to measure something, especially for companies that maybe have less well-developed risk mitigation practices. It can be a bottleneck or a barrier to actually even beginning to fill out the report. There was initial feedback to the OECD about uncertainty from whether to fill it out from organizational practices, despite what Miranda was mentioning previously, or specific AI systems, whether to write from a developer, deployer perspective. This uncertainty was something that we saw quite a bit when looking across reports. 8 wrote from a developer perspective primarily, 6 from a deployer perspective, 7 kind of blended the two, and 3 wrote from a different approach. Same thing with the organizational perspective. We found that, which slide am I on? Oh, 8. Did I go there? Okay, well, there we go. We found that 18 took, I skipped. 8 wrote from a developer perspective. I skipped this one. I'm sorry. Company-wide approaches, 13 organizations. 10 chose to do a sort of hybrid fusion between the organizational approach and a model-specific approach, and then 1 was more model-specific. So another thing that we heard quite a bit as well was that small and medium enterprises, service providers, had some capacity and information challenges when completing report submissions. Most of the reports were submitted by larger organizations with 250 or more employees, but 6 organizations with fewer than that did submit reports. They face different obstacles. We heard this in surveys, in our interviews, and we saw it even in looking at the reports. Capacity constraints, motivation to submit to show that this is a value proposition, lack of policy knowledge were all things that came up quite a bit. So the framework, of course, has this built-in flexibility, but we found also that responses, while informative, still remained quite high level and difficult to verify. Some of this is, of course, the nature of the questions. They often ask things like, does your organization do X, without eliciting more information on what organizations specifically do. But some of it was actually, in some ways, built into the process. Organizations with maybe more capacity to respond, that face potential public scrutiny, chose to provide less granular responses, chose to link out to kind of curated documentation. That has some instability risks, of course. Those links could die. They could disappear. They could change. So it makes it hard also to do sort of mapping over time to compare how things have evolved in this space. Smaller companies, kind of on the flip side, use some of these reports to demonstrate capacity, to build credibility, to showcase compliance. And so there were different approaches, especially based on the size of the organization. The framework does provide significant value. That was quite clear. Connection to the G7, G20, the global reach of it, the multi-stakeholder development process, the openness to submissions, efforts to complement existing frameworks were all things that we heard were really valuable. But we also found real limitations in knowledge about the framework. Of course, reminding that the survey is not representative, but even amongst the AI community that responded, only half were familiar with HAIP as a mechanism for this type of transparency effort. So limited knowledge really of the framework. And so, thinking about better awareness of processes could both encourage more participation, but also more impact of the framework as a whole. Finally, and really quickly, we found that, of course, benefits were really different based on who was participating and what their vantage point was in the AI ecosystem. Developers were using it to identify gaps, align teams internally, demonstrate trust, potentially shape the future of governance frameworks externally. Deployers were thinking about how to clarify risks. SMEs were using it to signal maturity. Enterprise customers were trying to understand risk handling, incidents. Researchers in civil society found some value in understanding current practices, methods, and gaps. Policymakers maybe look to these as well as a way to potentially shape future governance. So building on these findings really quickly, I'll just run through some of our recommendations. We roughly bucketed these into 4 groups on quality and consistency in reporting, clarity of purpose, the usability of the submissions, and incentives for broader participation and awareness. So on the reports themselves, thinking about especially that balance between flexibility and uniformity, the open-ended flexible reporting is really valuable to be able to get some of these broader insights, but also it poses a lot of challenges and limitations. And so I think we suggested revisiting some of this balance, keeping some of the open-ended components, but also potentially more structured questions as a way to identify trends over time, emerging consensus, more of a return on investment potentially for submitters. Where open-ended questions are included, more explicit guidance about what makes a good response could be quite useful. Encouraging respondents to answer directly in the framework, in their responses, rather than linking out is also very valuable due to those stability concerns and the challenges with comparing over time. And then thinking about enhancing transparency around what has been audited, what findings emerged, especially where organizations may be detailing practices, but what has been implemented and what has been verified by independent auditors, and where that shows up in the framework as well would be beneficial too. As we mentioned, the framework has many different goals depending on the actors involved. So figuring out some clarity of purpose for the framework as a whole, I think would be really valuable, though having that different ecosystem participate is a very good thing. But there is some ambiguity about how this fits in with the broader AI governance ecosystem, which can be further clarified. Different audiences for reports may be also interested in different things. So clarifying potentially the target audiences, allowing report submitters to select their target audiences, because that will also filter into the level of detail that they're providing and the technical sophistication necessary too. The framework is a step toward accountability, but that can be strengthened if the theory of change or thinking about how reporting actually leads to intended impacts is further developed. And companies are encouraged to detail how the reporting process actually has changed their practices over time. Comparisons across submissions came up regularly in our conversations and in survey responses as one of the clearest values of these public-facing reports, both within companies and for potential customers. But the process for comparison, I don't know if anybody has tried to do it, is very hard. You either have to open up individual tabs for every report and kind of click through them, or download individual reports. And so thinking about a way that allows that comparison to be more sophisticated, filtering by actors, by size, all these types of things, intended audience would also be useful. Making the framework iterative, changing with developments in markets, policies, and feedback, while keeping some core stable base as well. And then finally, thinking about ways to strengthen incentives for participation, awareness, and adoption. Those incentives, 17 organizations participated in the development of the framework, less than half of them actually submitted reports. So ways to build this community, to expand and to demonstrate the value add, whether this is actually entering into governance conversations, and where that's happening would be a way to kind of demonstrate what that return on investment for submissions would be. And then, of course, continuing to enlist stakeholders to participate through the various groups that are part of this HAIP ecosystem, expanding eligibility criteria, potentially building in a HAIP light type of framework for smaller companies that maybe have less capacity to respond or where their capabilities are limited. And that is all.
Welcome, everybody. I'm Cam Carey. I am the Ann and Andrew Tisch Distinguished Visiting Fellow at the Center for Technology and Innovation here at Brookings. For the past 6 years, I've co-led a project that we call the Forum for Cooperation on AI in partnership with Brussels think tank, the Center for European Policy Studies, which has brought together experts in AI from all sectors with several governments, 7 governments, including the US, the European Union, and Japan, among others. And I am very grateful to work today both with the government of India, and thank the U.S. mission, and with the Center for Democracy and Technology. I'm a longtime leader in tech policy. As an official in the Obama administration, as well as in my work at Brookings, CDT has been an indispensable partner, and so great to partner on this event and on this report. Um, Ambassador Kwatra talked about the variety of strategies, of initiatives, of multilateral groupings in the world of AI policy. And a question that often comes up, and it's a question that recurred several times in some of the questions that we received for this event in advance, is how do all of these things fit together? And is there fragmentation? Are things headed in different directions? Do we need some kind of unified governance? And in our project, we have articulated the view that, look, the AI is built on the internet, a network of networks around the world, and that we need to replicate that architecture for AI governance. Networked architecture with many different nodes, different pathways, and the HAIP process is an example of that. We've seen sort of a series of AI principles migrate across networks from the AI principles from the OECD, which now plays a role in the Hiroshima process, the work of the G7 in articulating the Hiroshima process, in proliferating it around the world. And the AI India Summit is part of that, and part of an iterative process in developing and understanding norms around AI. We are delighted today to have an international panel. Because it's international, everybody is coming remotely. One of our participants was supposed to be here in person, Keita Azuma from Japan, but his flight was delayed. So we are glad that you can join us en route. I'm going to begin with Keita, because coming from Japan, that is where the Hiroshima process originated, and Japan has played an important leadership role in AI for more than 10 years. The G7 started the process that led to the OECD AI principles under the Japanese presidency, and the Hiroshima principles similarly emerged under a Japanese presidency. So Keita, welcome. I'm delighted that you can join us today from, I guess, en route or wherever you are. So I understand that Keita is the Director of International Affairs at the Japanese AI Safety Institute. So, Keita, if you could tell a little bit about the work of the AI Safety Institutes, the network of AI institutes, and how that relates to the Hiroshima process. And I understand that you recently met with the Hiroshima Global Forum and AI Safety Institute. So where do you see that leading in terms of both the work of the ACEs and of the Hiroshima network?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for kind introduction. And I would like to express my sincere appreciation to the Brookings Institution and the Center for Democracy and Technology for convening this timely and important discussion. And Japanese Safety Institute views global AI governance not as abstract regulatory exercise, but as a practical necessity shaped by real societal challenges. As a rapidly aging society facing a severe labor shortage, Japan sees AI as essential to sustaining economic vitality and social services, while recognizing the need to manage its risks responsibly. Following extensive domestic and international discussion on AI governance, Japan Safety Institute and Cabinet Office enacted the Japan AI Act in June last year, and just last month adopted a new AI-based plan. So together, these frameworks aim to make Japan one of the world's most innovation-friendly environments for AI development and deployment, while ensuring safety, security, and trustworthiness. The core features of the Hiroshima AI process, multi-stakeholder engagement, openness, transparency, and interoperability, are closely aligned with these policy directions in AI Safety Institute and the Cabinet Office of Japanese government, and now form a foundational pillar of Japan's national strategy. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me turn now to Audrey Plunk. I've mentioned the OECD and its role in AI. Audrey is the Deputy Director of the Science, Technology, and Innovation Directorate at the OECD, which has done the work on AI. The OECD really played a central role in promulgating the HAIP reporting process and now in implementing that. So, Audrey, let me put to you the question that's the topic of this panel. What's next for the Hiroshima reporting process? We're getting some echo, Audrey.
Is this any?
Try again.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. Great.
I will try.
Next.
Okay. So just to say that I just want to thank Brookings and CDT for the work and the partnership and the research and the survey and the community that's building around the HAIP reporting framework. We're really excited that in less than a year, we've seen so much support as well as progress toward the objectives. I guess just in terms of where we are, I mean, you heard already from the report that there was 24. We have now 25 companies that have reported. Most recently, 2 more Japanese companies, a Danish company, an Indian company. So we see the community really growing. We also have 17 reports in process. So we're expecting, another.
Audrey, we seem to have lost you. We had a blast of static there. No sound.
Now, do you have sound?
Yeah. Okay. Now I hear you.
I'm so sorry. I don't know what you caught, but I was just saying that we have 25 reports now, and we have quite a growing, diverse community, and we have 17 reports in the pipeline that should be coming. I don't know when, but that's exciting, and we'll hopefully enriching the data that's out there for us to look at. In terms of what's next, I would group it into 2 big buckets. The first is, maybe 3 big buckets, actually. The first is to really continue to push on the participation in the existing reporting framework. As you see,
we're pretty happy with where we've gotten in a year, but there's a lot more that we can do. And that's why the work that with Brookings and CDT and others is so important to help get out the word. You heard the stats from the survey that, there's still a lot of the community that doesn't know about it. And so we're open for ideas of how we can continue to push it. But that's one big objective for the future, is to build that community, to grow it beyond where it is today. The second is to continue to update the framework and keep it relevant. And in that regard, we have two exciting objectives. The first is to link the reporting framework to our database of tools for trustworthy AI. And that's a database that includes a set of educational and technical tools that companies use. They're reported into the database. I think there's now more than 750 different tools. And so what we're hoping to do is to be able to tie the reports to that database so that we can start to look at what tools are companies using and their risk management processes. And then, we can start to build out a more detailed picture of what's happening. And so that development work is underway with regard to the database itself, but also with regard to the framework. And then the second piece of the tying it to other tools and data sources that we have access to at the OECD is to tie it to our incidents work. So we have a AI incidents monitor, which was really looking at press reported hazards and potential incidents. And so we would like to tie that database to reports so that we can start to see if there are patterns in activities over time. And so those are two elements of the future for the framework. And then I think it was already mentioned, but we really recognize that the community, when we negotiated the HAIP itself in the G7 presidency of Japan, it was only a couple years ago, but it was a fairly different ecosystem, or at least the ecosystem was still quite emerging. And we'd like the framework to be able to target a more diverse set of actors. And I think it was pointed out in the presentation from Brookings that, we have, large companies, but we also want to attract small companies and not just developers, but also deployers. And so we're thinking about adjusting and having maybe a lighter version working on a lighter version that is maybe more attractive to deployers and smaller companies that are not major, big model developers, but that could use the framework and want to use the framework, but are maybe the whole original one that was really focused on developers of advanced AI systems could be adapted further. And then finally, just in the normal course of maintaining things, we obviously want to keep the framework streamlined and as up to date as possible with the developments. And that's always, a bit of a chicken and egg problem because everything moves so fast. But that's work that we're doing now, and really excited to be here and happy to hear thoughts and feedback of how we can make it more useful and improve it. So thank you so much, Cam. And apologies for my audio issues. I moved offices yesterday to a new office, and apparently not everything's working yet. So my apologies.
One quick follow-up question. Any timetable for sort of the next iterations of the reporting framework?
Yeah, so we hope to be able to talk about some of it at least in India in a few weeks. I don't want to put a deadline on when we can absolutely launch it, but I think we might be able to show some of the progress there, and so I think we're moving quickly. Obviously, there's a few potential moments in the spring where we could make it public. So the team's working really hard, heads down, to move it forward as quickly as possible.
Well, thank you. So let me turn to sort of the other strain in this discussion, which is the road to the India summit. And we have participating Shatakratu Sahu, who's associate director at the U.S. India Foundation. And I understand, Shatakratu, that to follow up, I don't know whether you heard Ambassador Kwatra's description of the India mission. They the sutras, the chakras. But I understand that India has now issued guidelines as well, both for the public sector and to some extent the private sector as well. Tell us a little bit about some of that process, the action items, and what's ahead.
Thank you, Cam. And thank you to Brookings for organizing this. And it's great to be here with my panelists, Data and Audrey. Yes, I did hear Ambassador Kwatra very nicely laying out what the India AI Impact Summit is going to be about. And a key feature will be the governance approach. So in November 2025, India released its AI governance guidelines, which are voluntary and recommendatory in nature. And it is a result of about 12 months of consultation with industry within India. And a previous draft was released in January 2025 also. So I'll just briefly lay out what that governance guideline is. Firstly, it's a function of India positioning itself as a country looking to highlight, accelerate, and prioritize innovation over anything else. We don't want to miss the bus in terms of AI development or AI adoption and AI deployment. And we do realize very realistically that we are not US or China in terms of capacities of AI, infrastructure, compute, chips, etc. So while that is the reality, the approach is to maximize the impact of AI across sectors, especially those related to welfare. So having said that, what the key takeaways of this governance guidelines are that India in no time, in the near future, will not be introducing any new AI-specific law. It will rely on existing laws to counter risks and harms. And it is going to support voluntary measures. While it does that, if there is any specific harm which is not being addressed by the existing laws, then India will plug in targeted amendments and targeted amendments to the existing laws. What it would also do is, in the meantime, try to understand the AI value chain better. It would try to understand harms in the Indian local context better to address those risks and develop a risk framework which is unique to India in its own local context. So that's what, in a nutshell, the governance guidelines are about. It is pro-innovation, voluntary, and reliant on existing laws, while trying to understand the AI value chain better and the harms in the local context better. And this comes, it ties in really well with the India AI Impact Summit on February 19th, 20th, because what the summit is, and I'll be reiterating what Ambassador Kwatra said, it's about increasing access to AI and ensuring there's impact of AI on ground. And that's important because we want to see it on ground in healthcare, in education, and other critical sectors. So when this happens, I think I hope OECD and Brookings release the report at the summit, because India is in a position where it wants to adopt voluntary guidelines, but it's not at that advanced stage where the HAIP reporting is. So I think India would benefit from the findings of this report, which has been released by Brookings. And there are 2-3 recommendations from the report which I would like to highlight. One is increasing participation of companies to adopt this framework. I think that will work well with India. At this point, it will be critical to increase participation of companies within India, which are basically international firms operating in India and also domestic ones. If they should take up this voluntary framework and report on it, I think that will be a good starting point. Second will be incentivizing them to do so. Right now, there are many existing laws, as I mentioned, and also new targeted laws coming in, towards which the industry is slightly apprehensive. If not with the principle of the law, then definitely with the operation of the law. Just as an example, India released its report on copyright and generative AI, where it is suggested a hybrid model, where it is suggested on a recommendatory basis that everything online is available for AI developers to train their models on, unless it's behind a paywall. However, once they access it in a retrospective manner, they need to compensate the copyright holders. So that's something which India is experimenting with in terms of incidents and AI issues which are not properly dealt with existing laws. So it's a recommendation to amend India's copyright law. So that's being done. And I think incentives will be important because otherwise companies won't hop onto the reporting mechanism. Some incentives have worked well in the past for voluntary self-regulation. I think being iterative in that framework would be important. And I would just conclude by just thought I had when Valerie and Miranda were presenting is that if any of the reporting by the 24-25 company applies to India, I think that should be showcased because the application of AI development and AI deployment is cross-jurisdictional. It's across borders. So that could be a good starting point. Of course, I mean, the companies would need to, accept and consent to that being publicized in another jurisdiction. I don't know how to operationalize that, but that could be a good starting point. I'll stop there, but happy to take any more questions and looking forward to discuss more.
Thank you. So we're going to take questions momentarily. I will distill kind of one question for the panel coming from some of what we've received by way of questions online. So if I'll come to you in a moment. Chandrakratu, I was encouraged to hear you talk about the opportunity to use the HAIP reporting framework in India, and that. I think one of the great advantages of this process is to sort of fill in some of the blanks on principles of transparency, of accountability, that are recurring principles in AI frameworks. And part of the India guidelines as well. So helps to flesh out the meaning of those principles. So let me put to all of our panelists, how do you see the process of promoting further adoption of the AI principles? So we've heard in the presentation from Valerie and Miranda, as well as in questions online about the applications. Chandrakratu, you talked about sort of the contextual issues of AI. So how do we adapt this and diffuse it across principles and ecosystems around the world? Keita, do you want to start on that? I know Japan has worked with developing a Friends of Hiroshima network. Is that a channel to spread the reporting framework?
Yes, thank you very much. Regarding the significance and the current status of Hiroshima process, I would like to highlight 3 points. The first, we need shared global references that policymakers and developers can rely on. The HAIP reporting framework helps fill this gap by offering a common point of orientation. The second, the first reporting cycle has revealed clear areas of improvement, including greater clarity and consistency in terminology to enhance capability across reports. Third, the HAIP has value well beyond countries with advanced AI development capabilities. So for countries without extensive domestic AI ecosystems, the HAIP frameworks can serve as a principal guide for safe adoption, helping to prevent both regulatory fragmentation and the widening of the digital divides. So looking ahead, the several priorities stand out. That we should further clarify definitions to make reporting easier for companies and more meaningful for the general public, so that market trust itself becomes an incentive for transparency in global South countries as well. So we should also continue to scale the HAIP beyond the G7, not as a model of rural exports, but as a usable and adaptable references for the rest of the world, including the global South. Japan established AI Safety Institute following the United States and the United Kingdom, and we firmly believe that AI safety, security, and governance are not a trade-off with innovation or competitiveness. On contrary, interoperability among advanced AI countries, coupled with cooperation with the global south, is essential to achieving shared goals, greater transparency, improved comparability, and sufficient flexibility for diverse actors. So when Japanese SMC and Japanese government has worked closely with the AI summit hosted by UK, Korea, France, and we strongly support the upcoming India AI Impact Summit. So achieving safe and trustworthy AI while accelerating innovation requires deepened international cooperation and liberty in each country. So we really expect the leadership of India. Thank you.
Thanks. Audrey, I know you talked a little bit about wanting to get wider participation. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, and I'm glad that you brought up the HAIP Friends group, because we'll have a meeting in Tokyo in mid-March, and I think it's one of the tracks that we're participating in order to expand participation in the reporting framework. But also, I think we've linked somewhat intentionally, and I hope strategically, these things together of the OECD AI principles, the global partnership on AI, and bringing the HAIP framework into the OECD and the global partnership is, also there's a strategy to try to, as we expand the membership and the participation in the what we call the GPay, that also gives countries access to the HAIP, so that there's sort of a symbiotic and hopefully mutually reinforcing relationship between the attractiveness of participating at the OECD and the GPay, as well as participating in the HAIP, and that becomes a group of countries that is sophisticated, but also and we're emerging in the way that everybody is, and willing to come to the table to work in the same way with an industry that will participate. And so I think the HAIP Friends group, which you mentioned, Cam, and Kaita did too, is providing access to a lot of countries that are interested in and are emerging and may not otherwise necessarily know how to engage with us over here in Paris, to hopefully, not just bring them into the framework, but more largely bring them to the table at the OECD. In addition, of course, we try to have as many events as we can. We're not an event management place. We do analytical work here mostly, but we are trying to piggyback on the back of big events happening. And thanks to India for their willingness to work with us and host us. They're hosting a council meeting of the GPay at the summit in a few weeks, but also we hope to have a side event there on with Infosys and others on the reporting framework itself. So we're trying to write about it, to partner with NGOs and others like yourselves to get the word out, and to continue to work with the private sector, because their participation and their cooperation is critical. And so, as always, and I know I always say it, but we're always open to feedback and new ideas of ways that we can continue to push it forward. The holy grail for us would be also to get our countries to include it in their policy approaches. Japan has done a little bit of that, but if our countries can think about, if they're having voluntary commitments or they're having voluntary actions, to use this framework instead of creating new things, we'll continue to try to, push on that door with both our member countries, but also other countries, so that we can try to get as much, coherence and reduce the burden on organizations that want to share their experiences as possible. So, in our context, we continue to do that, and we've seen some positive signs of how governments might think of using it in the future.
Thanks, Audrey. I think you've answered, or at least partially, a question I had for Shatakratu, which is, can this play a role? Can diffusion of HAIP reporting play a role at the India summit? Shatakratu, anything you want to add on that, and on ways that India can help advance this fall?
Of course, thanks, Cam. I have a slightly different take to it. I think the lens has to be changed, and just being bluntly honest, the lens has to be changed from getting HAIP adoption increased in other countries and just find the lowest common denominator in the countries you're going to, which is transparency and accountability. But I think it has to be more than just presence at the India AI Impact Summit. And there needs to be some homework and groundwork, which I think OECD, Brookings, all of us need to do, because it will be difficult to convince, countries to adopt the framework. And just picking up from Audrey's point on just pushing the doors on the voluntary frameworks already existing. So I think there should be good effort done to understand what does that mean in the Indian context. And that translates to now, I'll give my opinion, is that within the AI governance guidelines by India, it has designated the AI Safety Institute, which India announced about a year back, that would be the nodal agency, so to say. So it can lean on the nodal agency which India has appointed for transparency and accountability work. And it has also highlighted how sectoral regulators need to take a play at it. So if you're talking about HAIP reporting, then for India, maybe you need to slice and cut it in terms of sectors. For example, in the financial sector, India's central bank is in the lead, the Reserve Bank of India, and there are some couple of other financial institutions also. So they would have their repository of knowledge in terms of what AI developers and deployers are doing with what kind of data, etc. Similarly for health, that's what India is trying to do, not create any new law, stay away from new codes as much as possible. So in health, you have the National Health Authority, you have the Ministry of Health, so on and so forth. I think visibility and marking the moment at the India AI Impact Summit would be important. But in the longer term, I think some more work needs to be done with the Indian stakeholders, especially those in the government, for more cohesion between the HAIP framework and what India is doing. And I'm saying this bluntly because having observed the Indian ecosystem over the past 2 years in terms of governance, I have not come across HAIP being marked as the go-to voluntary framework. I think there is some distance to be traveled for that. But having read your report, it seems like it's a great one for India. So I think more socialization, more integration with the Indian stakeholders, and understanding where India is in its governance journey, and understanding India's sensitivities towards prioritizing innovation over anything else would be helpful. That's just my take in terms of how to approach it, but that's just my take. I'll just say that.
We have about 1 or 2 minutes for questions. I know we have one over here. Any others? So let me hear both of those questions, and then I will ask the panelists to respond to the 2 questions together quickly and wrap up.
Hello, Chris McRae. So I had a question about the India models. The ambassador presented 4 models and also said they were grounded in the billion-person ID of India, which basically connects all the data sets. The 4th model he mentioned, which had the 5 layers from action apps to the AI models to the data center infrastructure, sovereign AI, to the chips, to the energy. I haven't seen that model published before in India. All the other models are actually on the India Action side. So I was wondering if Chatikatu could give a reference to where the 5-layer model is. And the other question was, in presenting the HAIP report, you said you'd drawn on...
You get 1 question.
You'd drawn...
A second question
did you
on the other side of the
India
room.
in your...
Sorry to cut you off, but we are running up on time. Question over here.
This is more of a reaction. It might be a little bit more of outside of the scope of the group, but thinking about global systemic exogenous risk, and also on a quote from the ambassador when he mentions about removing the bias out of some of the models. Specifically, we're talking about internet size large language models or auto type of models. They use it that much data. The removal of bias also adds a little bit of the subjectability of what can that be, given that the who and the what can be interpreted differently by different actors. And while thinking that the decision or utilization is going to be done really in the market by who and which models are used, and already seeing some actors, such as one of the world richest person trying to modify a large model to have a particular way of thinking. And as we're moving, as a Canadian Prime Minister Carney mentioned, to a new multipolar world, more fragmented in a new reality, how are we to approach those type of sensitivities when we can have a new sense of heuristics developing globally?
It looks like we have lost two of our panelists. So, Shatakatu, you're on your own. I know the first. Oh, Audrey, you're back. Okay.
I'm not.
The first question certainly is one for you, Audrey. The second, I mean, risk is certainly something that the OECD has focused on a lot. So, if you want to jump in on that, you're welcome to do that.
Thanks. I guess I'll just say that the framework itself tries to sort of address risk issues, and we recognize that that's one path. I think there's a lot of work going into the risk space. We're also trying to balance that out with the opportunity space, and where how do we make this technology useful and whatnot. I guess on the other risk piece, I would say we're trying to develop complementary products. I talked about the incidence work a little bit. I won't go into it deeply, but I think as this technology grows, we need more understanding of how the risks are playing out in real time and in real situations. And so we've tried to sort of get ahead of that by starting to build methodologies for measuring certain things. It's imperfect, it's early days, but I think you see that that is we take that really seriously. I don't know that we're going to get consensus globally on what governance looks like. I don't mean to be negative or pessimistic, but I think that's why some of these voluntary procedures and listening to what other countries are doing are so important, because we want to try to coalesce as much as possible and understanding the risks. We have a taxonomy of risks, we have a classification of risks, we have a lot of work that we've put into trying to harmonize how we can categorize risks and think about them, and in line with things like the NIST work and other standardization work around this. So I don't want to go on at length because I know we're out of time, but just to say, I think it's a big, important space that we need to not lose sight of in light of the global dynamics, but that I do think there's, it remains a top priority for us.
So, Kate, risk is certainly what the ACs are focused on. Any responses do you want to give?
And let me add one thing. Thank you very much for that great question. And then the HAIP scale view of the G73 power. And actually, I'd like to highlight that the one really important things like the interoperability and arrangement is policy coordination. That's really important. That's essential among national frameworks and international initiatives and emerging technological standards. For countries beyond the G7, including those in Global South, the Hiroshima process offers a shared reference point rather than a prospective regulatory model. So many countries are adopting AI technologies without having extensive domestic AI development capacity or comprehensive legal frameworks. In this context, Hiroshima process provides practical guidance on risk mitigation and transparency that can support safe and responsible AI adoption. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shatakatu. You get the last word. The fifth model.
I think Ambassador Kwatra was referring to the components of AI as such, and not a particular LLM model or an SLM model India is trying to build. He was just trying to break down that the 5 components of power, models, applications, compute, and maybe data centers. He was, I think, explaining that. What he was telling in essence was that India is trying to build its own sovereign large language models, SLMs, etc. And I would just like to inform the room that the Indian government has subsidized 12 startups has accorded 12 startups with subsidized compute, one of the cheapest rates per hour to access compute. So that's what the government is doing, helping select Indian startups with affordable compute to train their models on. And not all models are trained on all of the data that's available. Of course, that's subject to respecting privacy of the citizens. And there is a public datasets platform also. It's called AI Kosh, and it's up on the IT Ministry's website as well. So that's what we're trying to do. And if you zoom out from that also, outside of these 12 focused startups trying to build sovereign LLM models, India is really just trying to increase impact by using all open source models out there, also using models of the US mostly, and focusing on the inferencing layer, on the application layer. So the end goal is access to resources, impact on ground, and somewhere in between is your objective of building sovereign LLM models, because you want to have your sovereign capabilities in the longer run. So that is what Ambassador Kwatra was referring to. In terms of what are the details of these startups and what will get announced at the summit, I think we'll just have to wait for the summit and see. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all of our panelists. We will now take a 10-minute break.
Hi everyone, sorry. As you may have noticed, we're running a bit behind this morning. For folks in the room, we're going to shorten the break a bit and ask that everyone try to be back in their seats by 10:10.
Going to give them. We'll get started in just a minute, so folks could start taking their seats. All right, we'll get started in just a moment. All right. Thank you, everyone, for sticking around. There's obviously so much to talk about in these topics. Thank you. So the last panel left off on, I think, a really interesting note, which was there are a lot of different choices developers are making around how they're building these models, how they're handling risk, which is information that's useful for a lot of different folks to have, to be able to really compare, what are the choices that the one provider is making vis-a-vis bias, for instance, what are others, how are others handling risks throughout the supply chain, throughout the stack. And I think we're seeing a lot of examples around how providers are communicating those thought processes, including the HAIP process. One interesting new example was just, I think, yesterday or perhaps the day before, Anthropic just released a new version of its constitution, which in sort of a previous era you might think of as platform policies, but really is sort of the guidance on how they expect their system to behave and some of the guardrails that are trying to be built in. So we're really seeing a lot of different efforts here, but I wanted to start with some excellent panelists here, specifically David from Google and Amanda from Microsoft, respondents to the HAIP reporting framework, to really understand, how do your companies think about participating in efforts like these? Also, how is the HAIP effort situated amongst other efforts you might have, like model documentation, system documentation, general communications about the work that you're doing. What role does it play within the company? And I'll start with David, since we're have a pleasure to have him here in person, and then we'll turn to remote participants.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, and thanks to Brookings and CDT for convening this conversation. I think we are all struggling a little bit in the dark, or at least the fog over the past few years, about how to bring alignment around a very complex and heterogeneous landscape. And maybe just to take a step back and to state the very obvious, we are living in a time of intense change across, I think, kind of three vectors which are relevant to this whole conversation. One, of course, the technology and the incredibly rapid advances in AI over the past several years. Secondly, with respect to international coordination, rules of the road, to what extent there should be rules of the road internationally, and what those should look like. And then thirdly, how this rapidly evolving technology should be regulated. And we see debates going on across many different countries about more of a precautionary approach, more of an innovation-oriented approach, and how governments are thinking about these issues are all in flux. So three areas where we have a tremendous amount of flux, and one could be tempted to just throw your hands up. And I heard Audrey say before from the OECD, they're saying let's keep our expectations in check around governance, and fair enough. But I really give the OECD and the other governments who have participated in that process a lot of kudos for not simply throwing up their hands. And I think from an industry perspective, these efforts are super important, because in this time of flux and change, we do see many governments at the national level, and in the US sometimes at the state level, moving in to develop their own either soft or hard law regulation, often getting at the same ultimate objectives, but pursuing very, very different paths to that. And so, this is commonly called kind of the problem of fragmentation. And of course, again, going back to the theme of the India AI Impact Summit, which is like, this is all about, this technology is all ultimately about deployment, and that's going to be how we're going to harness the incredible benefits of it. If you have this very fragmented regulatory landscape, that is a fundamental impediment to deployment. And then secondly, in terms of the goals of ensuring responsible development and deployment of this technology, when you have that kind of fragmented landscape, that's a real problem. So I think the HAIP, and again, also commend the Japanese government for kind of leading that process and stepping into the breach and recognizing all of those uncertainties that I mentioned at the beginning and trying to develop a code. So I know that's a bit broad, but I think that's sort of why this effort is worth the candle, and why certainly we at Google have invested in the process and supported it.
People talk a lot about transparency artifacts as so-called boundary objects, which basically can facilitate the types of conversations that you were talking about, to even say, like, what are we collectively talking about, and what are areas of divergence that maybe we want to deliberate about and guide progress forward. But I know the same can be the case inside of companies. And Amanda, we've talked about how participating in processes like these can really be a good forcing function for companies to think about their own values and processes and what matters. And so can you talk about your experience, Microsoft's experience, working through this process, or any others that involve kind of collating, combining, refining organizational risk management processes?
Yeah, thanks, Miranda. And that's a really helpful tee-up, because I think the thing that I wanted to add in terms of David's framing is absolutely we have this heterogeneous and dynamic landscape, and we need alignment. And the other thing that we need is emerging sort of like consensus best practices on how to do this risk management work well. And so your question, I think, is going very much in that direction. Of course, our organization, many other organizations are doing a lot of work internally to evolve our best practices for managing risk in this space. And that's important. And for the ecosystem, it's going to have limited value if it doesn't sort of get out into the universe. And if we don't work together across industry and across the multi-stakeholder ecosystem to really drive sort of common expectations for what those best practices are. We really see this as like something that is very connected to where the AI governance conversation is today, because we certainly have the alignment challenges that have already been referenced. But we also do have this challenge where, in a very helpful manner, to some extent, the AI governance conversation has really been quite active in defining sort of high-level norms and expectations. And there's this real gap, right? And the kind of a consensus best practices about how to implement those. And so this is really where we see the reporting framework, the Hiroshima AI Process Reporting Framework, playing a role. And kind of across industry, the work that we are doing that you mentioned to figure out what we think works at best in practice, what others are doing, and surfacing that, and really working on trying to figure out, where there is emerging consensus. So if we think about, the reporting framework addressing the gap of trying to kind of get to the next level of detail beyond the kind of high level norms and ambitions that have been defined, and really thinking about, okay, what are the operational practices to do that work? And then thinking about sort of how also it can bridge between the other pieces of that puzzle that we have also worked through other sort of pathways. You talked earlier today, Miranda, and the report acknowledges there's all this other kind of work that's happened around, product-specific documentation, for example. We have other pieces of the puzzle. And so the other thing that I think is really important that we've really valued about the Hiroshima AI Process Reporting Framework is that it is very purposefully trying to sort of bridge across those existing practices and provide connectivity across them. And I think this also relates to Cam's point about how they see the governance ecosystem being a bit of a network of networks, and you need that kind of connectivity. And so it was really important that from the get-go, OECD facilitated a process that was about seeing this as a tool for interoperability, and seeing the opportunity to sort of link to existing best practices for risk management, even structurally, with the reporting framework. but then also seeing this reporting framework as something that does need to continue to be iterative because the ecosystem is going to evolve. As I said, we're in the early days of defining best practices, especially like as an industry, with that kind of like consensus best practices. And so we're going to need the reporting framework to evolve just for that purpose, but also it's a very dynamic technology ecosystem. So you're going to need the reporting framework to evolve to continue to drive alignment.
In the research, I think we saw that the disclosures from different companies, there was a real mix of practices that were clear were adopted wholesale and were really kind of embedded in an organization with research that was emerging and cutting edge and maybe sort of pilots and things like that. And I did think that speaks to exactly this point. If this is so dynamic, it is hard to parse sometimes in those documents, like what is an adopted best practice and what's an emerging one. But I think, hopefully the evolution over time through multiple iterations will help, demonstrate which practices are maturing and which are getting adopted and which were, maybe helpful at one time, but maybe no longer. I'll turn to Emily, who, has worked across industry in a number of roles, has been involved. You've been involved in some of the thinking around what good documentation of AI systems looks like. Can you give us your perspective just across the field? How are different institutions thinking about documentation, disclosure of information? How does this fit into the broader governance ecosystem? What's the theory of change behind these efforts, and do we see that bearing out?
Yeah. Thanks, Miranda, and thanks all for this great discussion. I think there's a lot of opportunity here. When we start getting into theory of change, that's really the big picture. Having worked on documentation for a long time now, dating back to papers in 2018, figuring out what it looks like to provide the information that different audiences need to be able to understand what it is that is going on inside these systems, how they're being built. I think a really important perspective that I've been focusing on lately, having worked across multiple companies, multiple types of companies, and done a lot of research into how people understand the technology and the building of it. For me, one of the things that this report does really well is understand that there is a distinction between builders and deployers, so that there's almost two big pictures we need to pay attention to here, because those incentives are different. And I think a lot about the incentives when we're talking about this kind of governance and framework and what the right documentation is. I've been breaking it down into 3 buckets around these kinds of company incentives, because an organization that is looking at selling to other businesses, so business to business, needs the trust of that business and that business's customers. And that's a very different perspective than a second type of company that is looking at a foundation of making their financial goals based on advertising, and then really now being in a place of more business to consumer perspective, thinking about what those individual expectations are and how that plays into balancing out the different aspects of the expectations for the types of use. And I think, in that deployment perspective, I think we spent a lot of time thinking about what the builders need, many years on how we're going to document the different models involved, the data that goes into the models, what we're going to share out about that internal perspective. And I think Amanda really highlighted that how-to gap, the high-level principles we're getting pretty good at in the building space, even if there is a proliferation of frameworks, and it's great to see the Hiroshima framework getting this kind of response in terms of the reporting, but that how-to gap for deployers, I think, is coming in to a lot more focus. We had one announcement in the last 6 months that a particular technology has 800 million monthly active users. And so you're talking about deployers who might not know these frameworks exist, or if they do, how to leverage those. And so for me, the big point around documentation and governance right now is that the deployment guidance really needs to be that practical how-to. Thinking about early days back when I was at Microsoft and building a practical standard for each audience, and then thinking about what gets shared out from not just the builders but those deployers. It's often really hard to highlight deep specifics that might be helpful to that audience reviewing documentation because of how fast things are changing internally. We've all seen certain coding companies go from nobody's heard of them to hundreds of millions in 3 months. And so those specifics right now with this are changing so fast that big picture framework is so important to have, but we also need better insight and understanding of those specifics.
Yeah, the deployer side, definitely something we saw, an area of growth. And I think some of the research my team's been doing recently is just on how much change an AI system can undergo when it's modified for implementation, whether that's fine tuning or connecting to tools, or just simply being deployed in a certain context. So definitely as part of the risk management big picture, that's a part that I think we haven't seen as much focus on since, a few years ago when the motivation to create the HAIP process and other similar things were really around the foundation models and the capabilities that they might bring. And now we're seeing how those diffuse and how we need a collection of information across that ecosystem. Emily, you talked about the developers and the deployers, but there are other stakeholders. And so I'll turn to Phil. Phil, you're at Armila AI, which is actually an insurance provider in the assurance ecosystem, folks trying to incentivize sort of practices that provide confidence that systems are working as they intend, that they aren't introducing risks. And so I'm wondering if you can talk about, from your perspective, what role do exercises like HAIP add to the overall risk management picture, but also is the type of information that assurance actors like you all need coming through in those, or does that high level information help guide you towards practices that you might want to see adopted by folks who are looking for insurance coverage or that instill confidence that we aren't going to run into those risks? What's your perspective?
Yeah, thanks so much. I think Emily's comments were a really great segue as we, as both provider of third-party evaluations for typically applications that have been developed or deployed, not as much on the frontier model side. And now as an insurer, we have had a need for data from our customers for several years, and the advent of frameworks like HAIP and other regulations and codes of conduct or even certifications are a huge help to us as they help to do a few things, all that contribute to really the scalability of trusted information exchange about these systems. So one thing that is set common requirements that the market as a whole can digest and adapt their internal practices to. But the reporting framework and the way in which the data is communicated as well is important for scalability, for transmission, and also really for companies out there ultimately who can develop technologies and other ways to automate the collection and transmission of these data, whether through GRC platforms or MLOps tools, if we're talking about system specific data. But yes, we have had, as a provider of third-party evaluations, we sometimes had difficulty collecting this information. I would say it wasn't typically because of the sensitivity of the data, if we're talking about application developers or deployers, beyond really standard questions about storage of data or any or servers or or data protection and sharing agreements, which were surmountable. It was far more about sometimes with larger companies, the difficulty of providing us some of the information we request as a matter of logistics. The persona who is interested in the third-party evaluation might not have immediate access or knowledge of some of the information that we would require, whether it was policy level information or information about the past, even validations that have been done internally, if we're talking to product teams or legal teams, and there was a new product, for instance. That type of centralized effort at collecting all the information that we might want to see hadn't been undertaken yet. And I'm talking about 2 to 3 years ago. This has changed as the market has matured overall. And this is also the same in underwriting, where we do ask about adherence or even certification with standards, such as ISO 42001, or any efforts to implement and oversee the oversight of and other internal risk management frameworks, maybe based on the NIST framework. For companies that have not gone through that type of either certification or enterprise-wide governance effort, they sometimes just haven't developed either the capability or even muscle memory for any one individual stakeholder to be able to collect this information, provide it in, let's say, a timely manner that makes it worthwhile for our customer and as well for us as a business. So frameworks like HAIP frameworks, certification frameworks as well, that where a third party has a mandate to essentially centralize the collection of this data, is a huge help for third party evaluators as well as for kind of the emerging cohort of underwriters of AI risk and liability. I think maybe a comment I'll make is that I think there's not enough focus in some of the frameworks, or let's say granularity, if we're talking about what Emily said on the deployer side, to get some of the information that you might want to see that is unique given the architecture of a system, given the sector that is used in, and the specific regulations or the uses and the types of testing that would be different than in other industries. So the short answer is there's probably never going to be enough. We're not really close, I think, to getting sector specific and use specific requirements for reporting on system evaluations. But that is definitely kind of an aspirational direction for the assurance ecosystem and ultimately for underwriters as well.
So you talked a little bit about risk management, about incentives for and the benefit of companies kind of going through this. I want to just ask everyone to reflect on what impact you've seen organizations going through efforts like Phil was talking about to do that collation to kind of get the house in order. Does that tend to change practice? Does that tend to lead to more responsible practices, or is it more reflecting practices that are being incentivized by other sources, whether the need to kind of build trust with customers or some of the other standards? How do these things kind of fit together? I know when I was in industry, and when there was a vacuum of sort of structure and documentation, the simple act of needing to write it down highlighted gaps that then we could kind of identify needed to be filled and develop those processes. So I'd love to hear what folks have seen in your experience, or where you see incentives coming from to do more of this moving forward. I'll start with David.
Or a couple of things. I think one real positive development over the past few years is the move from many companies working within their own spaces on these issues to more coordination, both across companies and then with governments as they've become much more active in this space, as well as, of course, civil society. So, Microsoft, Google, certainly many of the companies that have been deeply engaged on AI for several years have their own principles, approaches. For almost a decade, we've been issuing annual report on how we implement our AI principles and have detailed reporting about that. But I think over the past few years, the move towards coordination among the frontier labs, for instance, and the formation of the Frontier Model Forum 3 years ago, to ensure that we're comparing what are our own practices, for instance, to deal with frontier safety. Some of those issues, because we're talking about proprietary models and also risks related to CBRN, chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, that you're not going to necessarily have full transparency on. You might talk about your overall approaches and processes, but there's importance for kind of comparing your homework among companies and other experts in the field in more protected venues. I think that's all important, and something that processes like HAIP have sort of encouraged. I think the second piece that I would say is, and maybe picking up on Cam and Brookings' broader point on kind of network of networks, I think a recognition that this is going to be kind of a multi-speed bicycle, right? There's not going to be one place, and we are putting way too much pressure on something like HAIP as the place that we're going to all align on best practices on any of these issues, or for that matter, a particular subgroup at ISO or at NIST or the Frontier Model Forum. All of these things need to work together, and I think one piece of homework for us, and a place that I see good evolution for the HAIP process, is showing what the connectivity is between those broad principles and best practices, the 11 or 12 in that code of conduct. What are the specific technical implementations that are being developed that go to those broad best practices? So for something like model cards, there's a requirement in the code of conduct in terms of reporting on capabilities and evaluations and risks. And again, a number of us for many years have been working on how we report on that, but aligning on what are the best practices for that. There's both work at NIST and ISO to develop actual technical standards on that. HAIP, OECD is not the right place to do that, but to the extent that we can kind of map, these are technical standards that we are developing that show that we are progressing these best practices, and HAIP can reference, I think would be a helpful next step on that.
I'll jump to Emily because you nodded excitedly when I asked the question.
There's so much going on, and having been across 4 companies now in this era of a large jump in the advancement of AI, the number of times we have wished for a standard like HAIP with a reporting like HAIP in order to be able to make an internal point about what a best practice is and having that support. So while there's, a proliferation of frameworks, and, people have heard me say for almost a decade that we need those really practical how-to technical implementation specifics, the driving incentive, the factor of having these out there and having to answer them is so impactful. And, when we talk about that technical implementation, the thing I always come back to is putting it where people are. So if you're talking about, when I was working with teams that were building the technology, you don't want to have them go read a principles and framework document. You want it in the hub or the portal where they are launching that model or framework. And when you're talking about deployers, you want that reminder in however that assistant or language model or image model is there. So, when they're writing in a prompt, it can give them the reminders they need to use this in the best practices way. So whenever I hear that, technical implementation perspective, I go to these practical points that I think are really helpful as a starting point when we might get overwhelmed by taking X number of principles into X number of best practices into what is the individual person on the day they're at work doing.
Such an important perspective. I'm sure Amanda and Phil, I imagine you have amazing points. I'm just going to maybe take two questions for starters, and then folks can respond to any more thoughts on this question, as well as start speaking to other folks' interests. Yes, Mike, we'll get over to you just a moment.
Hi there, Colin. My question is about what sort of risk management practices are sort of ripe for maybe standardization or that how-to point in their life cycle. Where are we with some of these things that we're reporting on in HAIP that we can build consensus on to something really concrete?
Great. Maybe I'll actually stop there and I'll turn back to Amanda, because I know you run the team at Microsoft who really thinks about encapsulating good practices into internal standards at the very least and thinking about what is ready. So over to you.
Yeah, thank you. And this is I think a helpful question to take in parallel to the one that you were talking about before, because I do think when you think about what does something like providing a report on this framework achieve that's different from something other processes, as David mentioned. I mean, all of our organizations, I think, have a lot of robust internal process where we're working on, as you mentioned there, Miranda, like how do we operationalize our principles, and what are the internal standards, the internal sort of requirements and practices that we need to implement this technology, to develop this technology consistent with our principles. We're always going to have continuous iterative improvement of what those practices look like internally, and we have lots of drivers of that. But we also do need to be in conversation more broadly with others in industry and with stakeholders across civil society, academia, and with policymakers. And I do think that is like an area where there is such opportunity through the HAIP Reporting Framework. And it really gets to this question about where is there opportunity to actually drive progress right now in defining in more detail those shared expectations about practices. Even I think honestly today at the level of terminology and what we are associating with different areas of practices there's real value and working on standardizing that. And so through the process of really working on the specifics of the HAIP Reporting Framework and what is associated with risk identification and evaluation, what practices align with that, what are we talking about in the context of risk management practices, risk mitigation practices, and this piece that Emily raised around sort of who's doing what and how all of those practices need to be implemented in a way that's coherent for ultimately achieving the risk management outcome that we have. There's a real need to deepen understanding about shared responsibility across the AI value chain for those practices. I think that's the opportunity that something like the HAIP Reporting Framework, it's ripe in this moment to really make progress in that way. And there's a real need, and something like the HAIP Reporting Framework, especially to the extent that it evolves towards providing more clarity about, the kind of pathways for reporting for different parts of the AI value chain. And we can maintain kind of coherence across how different parts of the value chain are providing context on their practices that accrue to the kind of risk management areas that the HAIP Reporting Framework enables you to report on. I mean, that's a real opportunity for the ecosystem. And again, we're going to have our own internal processes. It's always helpful to be able to also have this kind of internal, external feedback loop on what expectations are, how we are kind of aligning those, and what those look like across the ecosystem.
Phil, on that same question, your organization just sort of adopted ISO 42001 certification as a concrete indicator of risk management that you actually take into account in your underwriting. So that seems like it's a signal of a sense of maturity of certain practices. But I wonder if you could speak a little bit to why did you make that move, and how would you determine whether a practice is mature enough to actually consider from a monetary perspective as to addressing risk?
Yeah, that's a great question, and we do ask about ISO 42001 adherence certification as part of our application form for our insurance, as well as other frameworks too. For instance, NIST AI Risk Management Framework, or whatever else they have been using as a reference point for us. And in part, as I said before, to hopefully nudge the customer in the direction of some of that readily available information because of that internal effort that has been undertaken. ISO 42001 has over 200 companies that have now have achieved the certification. It's not actually a huge number, but we're trying to incentivize the adoption of some of these leading frameworks. So that is one. NIST as well. At least it's a starting point today for what we hope will be even greater adoption of that standard, others as well. What we would love to see is at the end, there is some work at ISO already, 42119, others, where there is more system level standards being developed, and David is quite right that HAIP might not be the forum and the vehicle to answer all of these questions that we have either as a third party evaluator or underwriter, but there are some other efforts that we would like to encourage as well. And given the early stage of AI insurance and assurance, I think more broadly, we also see ourselves as having a role of signaling what will be important, even if it is not giving us the full picture or as much as information as we'd want or precise or as deep. We will kind of continue to signal and try and drive the market in directions to support that adoption.
Thank you so much. I think we're running up on time, so I'll wrap up here and just say thanks everyone for joining us today for this overview leading up to the AI Impact Summit in India coming up, for the release of this research on the HAIP reporting framework, and for these really robust discussions. Thank you to the panelists. And I'm sure there will be many more such conversations to come, both up to the summit and beyond. Have a great day.
Right, we are getting close to the last session and the closing. My name is Elham Tabassi. I'm the Director of AI and Emerging Tech Initiative and a Senior Fellow at Global Economic Development here at Brookings. And I joined Brookings in March, and I used to work at NIST. It really warms my heart every time I hear NIST name in any of the conversations. So with that, I am actually very pleased to have a conversation with my former colleague, H.E. at NIST. It was mentioned that NIST is also working on some sort of a pre-standardization documents and effort. We call them zero draft on transparency requirements. And given that the focus of this effort and this conversations and why we start looking at the HAIP is this broader transparency documentation. And we heard it this morning from many of our speakers that there are many different aspects to this, from transparency of the organization's governance to things such as data sheets for data sets, to transparency at the data level, at the model, at the system, risk management. So, and the need for actually also be clear on the audiences of we are doing the transparency reporting for what purpose and to whom. So I thought of joining Jesse on hearing about what NIST is doing along this line. So Jesse, it is now about a year or so that NIST started this project of zero drafts, and one of them is on transparency requirements. So how about we, feel free to introduce yourself and tell us about, first let's start about motivation for zero draft and some sort of an overview of the document.
Sure. Thanks very much, and wonderful to be here with you.
You are very soft, and we can't hear you well.
Let me see if I can fix that. I can try speaking loudly if that helps at all. Is that any better?
It's not. It didn't. It's the same. Can you hear him? Can the people know? No, we have to do something with the audio.
What about now?
It's good.
It's good. Okay, wonderful. Apologies. Very good to be here with you all, at least virtually. As Elham said, I'm Jesse Dunyats. I'm a computer scientist with the AI team in the Information Technology Lab at NIST, overseeing a lot of our standards work, and that includes the Zero Drafts project. So maybe I'll just give a moment of background. As Elham knows well, we had a lot of engagements with the community in 2024 on what the needs were for standardization in the community, and we kept hearing that everyone wanted standards quickly and also involving everybody they could think of in the process of development, which are both very hard things to accomplish, and they're extra hard together. And in addition to that, NIST is just one player in this broader ecosystem. We don't even run the process of standards development. So zero drafts as a concept was our answer, really largely Elham's answer to that question of what we could do. And
blame on. Now you know where to put the blame on, but go on, Jesse.
And no blame there. All credit. And we decide. So the concept was that we take the pen early on to come to something that is rich and thorough and relatively mature with a lot of community input. That is not a standard, but that we can then submit as a proposal to say, we've gotten you a long part of the way toward an actual consensus standard. Now go through the actual consensus processes to get the rest of the way there. And the hope is that our process would be able to pull in more kinds of input and also hopefully speed the process up end to end. So it's a pilot to see if we can accomplish that. We chose the documentation topic as one of our two initial pilot topics for a couple of reasons. One is that there is, as we've heard a little bit about already today, a large body of work that's already been done on what makes for good documentation. And so there is something to standardize that we can probably get to consensus on, at least to some extent. And that there was a sense of real significant need in the community, as again, we've heard already, to have something about this. And so we decided to maximize the extent to which those things were true of what we're focusing on. For the moment, we're focusing on documenting AI-related data sets and AI models, leaving the system piece for future work.
So you said that you're working with the community. Can you give us a idea about the, who are you engaging? What are those people? Who are those people? And also, what's the stage of the document where we are now?
Absolutely. So we have been getting lots and lots of emails to an open email inbox, which you can find on our website, with comments on what the materials we've put out at various stages so far. And so that's anybody and everybody. We've also gotten, we've worked through the NIST's AI consortium, which has quite a variety of large companies, small companies, non-governmental organizations, academic organizations. And then we've also been working with the U.S. national body to ISO IEC's Committee on AI to make sure that we're reflecting all their views and aligning with them in advance of ultimately turning the document over to them. Where we are now is we have a pretty thorough extended outline that we put out a few months back. We've collected a large amount of input on that, and hopefully we've found resolutions to some of those key outstanding issues that now we're in a position to, we're drafting at this point. We're actually putting together draft text that is going to come out. And the way that we're working through the document, the way that we're thinking about the document is, it has a couple of key components. It has a piece about potential outcomes of documentation, meaning dimensions that documentation can affect positively or negatively, depending on whether and how documentation is done, then some guidance on how to do it well so that we get toward the positive versions of those outcomes more than the negative versions. And then keeping all that in mind, actual templates for both AI data sets and AI models that are, first of all, designed to reflect all of that guidance in the rest of the document, but then also to really provide some flexibility for people to then further apply the guidelines to tailor what they do and don't put in to, for example, really meet the needs of exactly who they're targeting with this documentation. And so we try to specify in the guidelines piece how to do that, and the templates kind of provide the practical mechanism to do it in a way that is comparable across providers and across documenters.
Looks like to me that this is a piece in the broader transparency documentations, and going back to a lot of things that we heard, we need to connect all of these things together. We need a combinations of this type of best practices, zero drafts, towards standards, to cover transparency of the different parts of the AI lifecycle. So I want to hear from you how you see all of this connects to HAIP, and then if also can give us a sense of the timeline on as HAIP is going to be revised and discussed, as we heard it from Audrey, and how your timeline of sending it to ISO.
Sure. I think our focus is really the kinds of things that had typically been included in a model card or a data set card, or documentation artifacts of that nature. And so we're looking at trying to provide that common structure, very practically speaking, for reporting the details that some audience needs to know for a purpose like, can I use this model for my purposes? Can I trust this model for, has it checked the boxes for whatever policy requirements I have in place? And so trying to provide the mechanism for that kind of communication at a fairly granular technical level. Actually, there's even I could imagine even there's a line in the HAIP framework that has a question about whether you have such documentation. One could imagine simply pointing to an artifact of the type that we're talking about producing in the template that we're providing and saying, there, that's it. We provide that type of documentation. Go check that out. So I think there is a connection there. It isn't quite the same form of transparency and documentation. In terms of timeline and next steps, we are, again, currently in the stage of drafting this. I would expect that we will have a draft out for comment within the next couple months. And then beyond that, we will hopefully not too long thereafter take all the comments that come in and turn that into something that we hand over to the U.S. national body, and the U.S. national body who represents the country, not just the government, but the country in ISO IEC, will then have to decide what to do with it, and hopefully in relatively short order propose the content or incorporate it somehow into the ISO IEC suite. I would expect that could happen by the end of this year, although it depends kind of what process is. It might happen as in the fall. It might take even shorter. It might take even longer than that, depending on precisely what bureaucratic process is followed to get it into the ISO IEC suite.
Fall 2026 plus minus one quarter. I want to open the floor for question for Jesse. We have one question here. Please go ahead. I don't see a microphone, so I can give you a microphone.
So you said you're doing zero report on documentation. Could I ask what documentation is? Is it only paper-based, or could it eventually be a model itself, which might have a paper report at any particular time, but which you could update by putting in further papers? So what is documentation?
Jesse, did you get the question? So the question is that is it document for documentation, or that document for documentation can be interactive and online? I think that was the question.
What we're producing is agnostic to that. So what we're producing is what the information structure should be. We are not trying to codify what form it should take. What are the machine readable formats? What are the whether it's a PDF or a website or anything else. And so you could take the same information and put it to any of those formats. I hope that answered the question on that. Yeah.
Any other question for Jesse? All right, thank you so very much, and all the best with this process, and we follow this. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe we are coming to the end of our program. I want to thank everybody that joined us either in person or virtually. Special thanks to all of our speakers for sharing their time and insights with us. I think if I want to quickly summarize it is that, yes, we do need transparency, and transparency can take a lot of forms, and there are a lot of people that working on this, and we need to connect all of those things and try to be better, and hopefully get all of them towards some sort of a standards or sets of standards that can be the backbone of better responsible AI, but also a lot of the policy and regulation conversations that's going on. So thanks again, and I'm sure that this conversation is going to be continued. So stay in touch, and congratulations to the authors of the report, and my special thanks to all of the Brookings and CDT team for making this event possible in terms of the content and topic for having conversations, but also all of the logistics behind the scene. Thank you all, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.